My name is Renata Cole. I'm 41 years old, and for 16 years I've investigated insurance claims for a living. Which means I spend my days reading the small, specific ways people lie about what burned, what broke, and what was never really there to begin with. 3 weeks before my family's small memorial gathering at our late grandfather's cabin, I found out exactly what my cousin needed me to say out loud in front of an adjuster. And that adjuster had no idea the woman standing next to him with a paper plate of potato salad had already flagged his file 2 days earlier from her own desk, under a different name. Welcome back to MJ Revenge Stories, where every story starts with silence and ends with power. If you've ever been the one trusted to keep a secret straight, right up until the secret needed you to lie under oath, this one's for you. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and let's get into it. I've worked claims investigation for 16 years. The last 9 of them specializing in property and casualty fraud. The fires that start suspiciously convenient. The water damage that shows up right after a policy renewal. The burglaries reported a little too cleanly. My job is pattern recognition dressed up as paperwork. I read a claim file the way other people read a face, and most of the time, the file tells me the truth before the person filing it ever does. My quirk, if you want to call it that, is that I can't sit in a room with a receipt or an invoice without doing the math before anyone hands me a total. Restaurants, grocery lines, my own husband's contractor bills. I'm already 3 lines ahead, checking the arithmetic like it's a nervous tick. Marcus used to find it funny. Now he just slides me the bill and waits. It's a small habit. It had never once cost me anything in 16 years. It was about to be the exact tool my family didn't know I'd already used against them, 2 days before they ever asked me to. I grew up the older of 2 cousins raised practically as siblings, me, and my cousin Dana, whose mother, my Aunt Bev, has spent 30 years running our extended family the way some people run a small tents company. My grandfather, Walt, built a modest lake cabin outside Traverse City in 1979 with his own hands, and when he passed 4 years ago, he left it jointly to his 3 children, my mother, my Uncle Ron, and Aunt Bev, with the understanding, never formalized, that it would stay in the family. I loved that cabin more than almost anywhere on earth. I also, by profession, could read an insurance policy the way most people read a menu, which nobody at that cabin had ever once found useful, until, apparently, they did. The message came on a Thursday evening, in the family group chat, warm and vague the way important things in my family always arrive. Getting together at the cabin in 3 weeks to honor Grandpa Walt's memory. Keep it low-key, just family. Then, a separate text landed just for me from Aunt Bev, the way important things always land separately when they're actually about something else. Ren, can you swing by early on the Saturday? Need your help with something before everyone gets there. You're always the one who keeps things straight. You're always the one who keeps things straight. I'd heard some version of that sentence my whole adult life, usually right before something needed straightening that nobody wanted to name out loud. It had never once, until 3 weeks later, made my stomach drop the way it did that Thursday night. Here's the backstory, because none of what happened at that cabin makes sense without it. 14 months earlier, a fire had damaged the cabin's north wall and part of the kitchen. A real fire, started by a faulty space heater Uncle Ron had left running overnight. Nothing suspicious about the cause itself. The claim went through Great Lakes Mutual, the same regional insurer, coincidentally, that my company subcontracts fraud review for in that territory. The adjuster assigned was a careful, soft-spoken man named Kurt Delgado, and the payout, once approved, came to $61,000 for structural repair and contents replacement. The trouble was the contents list. Somewhere between the fire and the claim filing, that list had grown. A kayak nobody in the family had ever owned. A vintage tool collection worth $8,000 that, as far as I knew, consisted of the same rusted coffee cans of screws Grandpa Walt always kept in the shed. 2 mattresses replaced that had in fact survived the fire untouched, because I'd slept on one myself the summer before. Aunt Bev had handled the claim on the family's behalf, since she lived closest and had power of attorney for the estate's remaining affairs. Uncle Ron, an easy man who'd never once in his life argued about anything, signed whatever Bev put in front of him. My mother, 3 states away and grieving her own father, signed off by phone without reading past the total. I want to be honest about the part of this that isn't noble, because if I only tell you the principled version, you won't understand why I got in my car 3 weeks later instead of calling the fraud line first. My mother had been quietly, privately struggling since my father died 2 years earlier, smaller, more careful with money than she used to be. In ways she never said out loud, but I noticed in every visit. Some part of me, a part I'm not proud of, understood that an inflated claim meant more money landing in accounts that included hers. Some part of me had decided, without ever fully admitting it, not to look too closely. I told myself that not looking was kindness. It took me a long time to understand that not looking was just a different kind of participation. I told Marcus about Aunt Bev's text over dinner, and he set his fork down with the specific stillness he uses right before saying something I don't want to hear. "You investigate this exact kind of file for a living," he said. "If she's asking you to help with something before a memorial, it's not casseroles." I told him it was probably just logistics, chairs, coolers, who was bringing what. He looked at me the way you look at someone walking calmly toward a door they already know is on fire. "Ren, when has anything with your family ever been just logistics?" I went anyway. "Some doors you keep walking back through even after you've learned exactly what's behind them, because the people on the other side are still, somehow, yours. Stay with me here, because what I found at that cabin over the next 2 hours, I ended up assembling the way I assemble every claim file. One inconsistency at a time, until the inconsistencies stop being separate and start being a pattern." I arrived at the cabin at 9, an hour early because I am always early, expecting Bev's car and maybe a cooler of drinks. Instead, I counted 6 cars in the gravel lot, a rental van with a company logo I recognized immediately, Great Lakes Mutual's contracted field office, and coiled by the porch steps, a brand-new garden hose still wearing its plastic packaging tag, lying next to the same cracked green watering can Grandpa Walt had used for 30 years, sitting untouched beside it, like nobody had bothered deciding which version of the cabin they were performing that day. Inside, Aunt Bev met me at the door in a blouse I'd never seen, pressed and new, while behind her, propped in the corner of the kitchen, sat the replacement mattress from the claim, still factory-wrapped, price tag dangling, next to the original mattress from my old room, water-stained but otherwise fine, that someone had shoved half into a closet like evidence they hadn't finished hiding. "You're just in time," Bev said, hugging me a beat too long, the way people hug when they're rehearsing being fine. "Kurt's doing a final contents walkthrough before he signs off on the last disbursement. We wanted a family member here who could, speak to what was actually in the cabin. You always know exactly what's what." Dana found me in the hallway 20 minutes later, arms crossed, using the tone she'd used on me since we were 12. "Don't make this weird, Ren," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Mom's handled everything. You just have to back up what's already on the paperwork." I said I hadn't seen the paperwork. She said, a little too quickly, "You don't need to. Just stick to the story. Stick to the story." The second delivery, though I wouldn't understand that yet for another hour. Kurt Delgado, the adjuster, was a careful man in his 50s with a clipboard and the unhurried patience of someone who has learned not to rush a family through grief-adjacent paperwork. He was polite to me immediately, the way people are polite to whoever seems most reasonable in a room. Uncle Ron sat on the porch the whole time, not quite watching, running his thumb along the edge of a coffee can of screws like it might tell him something. Around 11, Bev asked me to run out to her car and grab the folder with the receipts for Kurt's review. I went alone. The folder sat on the passenger seat, and on top of it, not receipts, not yet, lay a single printed email, Bev's own account, sent to herself 2 nights earlier as a note. The kind of thing you write when you're rehearsing a version of events you need to remember exactly. It read, in part, "Kayak say it was Dad's, stored under the deck, water damaged beyond repair. Tools, appraise high, nobody will check a shed. Mattresses, both, even though we know one's fine. If Kurt asks about timeline, everyone says the fire started closer to midnight, not 9 p.m., or the neighbor's statement won't line up." I stood there in the gravel lot and read it twice. Because that's what I do when a document tells me something my life hasn't caught up to yet. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't grief-fogged paperwork. This was a script, written down, timed to the neighbor's own statement, built to survive exactly the kind of scrutiny I hand out for a living to strangers every week. I didn't confront anyone in that gravel lot. I did the only thing 16 years of training has ever taught my hands to do on instinct. I photographed the email exactly where it sat. Folder still closed on top of it, and I walked back inside holding the actual receipts, smiling the smile you smile when you've just found out your family wrote you a script, and never once imagined you'd read past your own lines. 15 minutes later, standing near the porch with Kurt's clipboard between them, Bev caught my eye across the room and gave me the small, expectant nod I'd now recognize as the third delivery still to come. But first, in front of Kurt, in front of Ron, in front of Dana, she said it warmly, like settling a fact for the record. "Renata's very detail-oriented," she told Kurt, patting my arm. "She always knows exactly what's what. She'll confirm the contents list for you." I smiled back. I did not mention the email. Not yet. By noon, Kurt had his clipboard open to the final page, the disbursement authorization, and Bev steered the moment toward me, with the practiced ease of someone closing a sale. "Kurt just needs a family confirmation on the contents," she said. "So we can get this last check released before the season's out. Ren, you knew this cabin as well as any of us. Tell him what was here." Kurt turned to me, pen ready, genuinely expecting nothing but a formality. Dana stood just behind her mother's shoulder, arms still crossed. Uncle Ron had come in from the porch and stood in the doorway, coffee can of screws still in his hand, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read yet. "Just stick to the story, Ren," Bev said, gentler this time, almost affectionate, and there it was, the third delivery, dressed up as trust and functioning as an order. I let the silence sit. 4 full seconds, maybe 5, long enough that I heard the lake through the open window, long enough that Kurt's pen hovered without touching paper, long enough that Bev's smile started to work at holding itself in place. "There's no kayak," I said. Bev's face did the thing faces do when a sentence doesn't parse yet, a small tilt, a blink. "What?" "There's no kayak," I said again. "There never was one. Grandpa Walt didn't own a kayak. The tool collection in the shed is worth maybe $400 in scrap value, and I slept on that mattress." I nodded toward the closet, 11 months ago, and it was fine. "I have an email, sent from your account to your own inbox 2 nights ago, laying out exactly what everyone was supposed to say today, including a fabricated fire start time to match a neighbor's statement." Kurt's pen went still entirely. I turned my phone around and showed him the photograph. Not Bev, professional courtesy, in a strange way, one investigator to another, even though he didn't yet know that's what I was. "I work claims fraud review for a regional carrier," I told him quietly. "Not this file, not your company directly, but I recognize what I'm looking at. I'd strongly recommend a hold on this disbursement pending your own SIU review." Bev tried a second run at it, reaching for the phone, the way you reach for something you can still, somehow, close back into a folder. "It's a family misunderstanding, Kurt. And I held up a hand, the way you hold up a hand to a claimant trying to talk over a finding mid-sentence. Her second attempt landed softer than the first, and got her even less. Dana tried a third angle, pivoting the way people always pivot, from demand to injury. "Are you seriously doing this, to your own family, today?" And I said the sentence I'd been building, without knowing it, for 16 years. Calm, not loud. I didn't owe her loud. "You asked me to lie to a claims adjuster about my grandfather's cabin, so a check could clear before he finished checking. I don't owe you that story. I never did." Kurt, to his credit, did exactly what a careful adjuster does when a file stops adding up in front of him. He closed his clipboard, thanked the room with professional neutrality, and told Bev the disbursement was on hold pending a formal review, which, given what he'd just seen, would now likely include a referral to the carrier's Special Investigations Unit. He didn't accuse anyone of anything in that kitchen. He didn't have to. The hold itself was the sentence. Aunt Bev's second attempt at a defense, offered to Kurt's retreating back, to the room, to no one in particular, was the one that finally cracked something loose in her. "I was going to use the difference to help Ron," she said, voice suddenly smaller. All the polish gone out of it. "His hours got cut in March. He didn't want to ask anyone for help, and I thought a big enough check and nobody would even have to know he needed it. Uncle Ron, still in the doorway, went very still, the coffee can in his hands, and I understood, all at once, that he hadn't known the real size of what she'd built around his silence either. He'd signed what was put in front of him because that was easier than admitting, out loud, that he'd needed the $30,000 Bev had quietly decided to manufacture for him. The SIU review took 6 weeks. In the end, Great Lakes Mutual didn't pursue criminal fraud charges. Bev cooperated fully once the hold forced her hand, repaid the inflated portion of the claim from her own savings over an agreed schedule, and the legitimate $22,000 in actual fire damage was released to cover the real repairs. It cost her something that mattered more to her than the money, though. Her name came off the estate's remaining financial authority by unanimous, quiet agreement between my mother and Uncle Ron, who for the first time in his life stopped signing whatever was placed in front of him without reading it first. 3 weeks after the review closed, I got a card in the mail, no return address I recognized until I opened it. Uncle Ron's handwriting, careful and slow, the way a man writes who isn't used to writing much down. I should have asked for help instead of letting your aunt build something around my pride. I'm ashamed it took a stranger with a clipboard to make me say that out loud. Thank you for not letting it slide, even when it would have been easier for you. I read that card twice, the way I read documents that finally reconcile something. It did more for me, honestly, than the review's official closure letter ever could. Here's what 16 years of reading other people's fires finally taught me about my own family. Being trusted to keep the story straight isn't the same as being trusted with the truth. One is a function. The other is a choice, made in the open, where a person's real trouble can actually get looked at, not folded into a fabricated kayak so nobody ever has to say the word broke out loud. That's my story. If it meant something to you, drop a comment and tell me. I read every one. And if you want more stories like this, hit subscribe to MJ Revenge Stories, because there's another one waiting for you next week.